yesterday. We're pleased with the progress that's being made, and I'm just asking for your assurance today that we will continue to implement those parts that are still in progress.
Yes, absolutely, because it is critical that we be able to attract and retain the best talent available. This is an important component of that because this is something that you've known and lived more than as much as anyone. This is a family enterprise. It's not simply the Foreign Service officer that is there. It's the entire family. So we want to make sure that we are finding ways through the Act to support them, to create greater opportunity for them, because that's the most effective way to attract and retain people.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me turn now to the recent meeting between Putin and President Xi, which took place, of course, just days after the ICC confirmed what we knew, which is that Putin was a war criminal. This case based on the fact that they've abducted Ukrainian children and taken them forcefully to Russia. President Xi has reiterated the fact that relationship between Russia and China knows, quote, no limits. The friendship knows no limits. You and others in the administration have warned of the possibility that China would start providing material military support to Russia in its fight against Ukraine, and that would be a red line that would trigger severe economic consequences in the form of sanctions. I'm glad you've established that very clearly. In order for that to be effective, we need to make sure our allies and partners are on board. That includes our European partners. It also includes our democratic partners like South Korea, Japan, Australia, others in East Asia and around the world. So my question is, do we have a break the glass plan? Because what we don't want to see happen is if China were to provide military assistance, that we're all fluttering around trying to figure out the way forward. Obviously, imposing economic sanctions on Chinese entities is tougher than on Russian entities, given the more interconnected nature of the economies. But do we have a break the glass plan with our partners in the event China were to provide military assistance to Russia?
Thank you, Senator. Let me say two things quickly about this. First, as you noted, going back to day one of the Russian aggression, we have been very clear with Beijing about the serious problem that any material lethal support to Russia for the aggression against Ukraine would pose for us and we believe for countries around the world. President Biden shared this directly with President Xi about 3 weeks into the aggression when they spoke by video conference. We've reiterated that. And as we've seen them consider it more actively in recent months, we have doubled down in making clear to them the serious problem that this would pose. But what's important is this, and it's to your point, it's not just us. When we shared with allies and partners some of the information we had about the active consideration that China was giving to providing this lethal material support to Russia, this galvanized a number of other countries, all of whom directly engaged senior Chinese leadership on the question. And so we're actively talking to them about what it is we would do in the event that happened. But my hope is that China, having heard not just from us, but from many countries, including countries with which it's trying to curry more favorable relations, that it heard them and heard us and will not cross that line.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that. I just think it's going to be really important that we have in place a specific plan with our partners so that we are ready to go and that China knows we're ready to go, because the deterrent effect of that, I think, depends on their clearly understanding the impact. If I could turn now to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Since the new Israeli government was formed, high-level members of our government have visited Israel, including yourself. Just a few days ago, President Biden had a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The readout from that call indicated that President Biden underscored the need to, quote, maintain the viability of the two-state solution, unquote, and the importance of abiding by the two agreements that the United States helped to recently broker between Israelis and Palestinians at Aqaba and later at Sharm el-Sheikh. Those agreements committed Israel to, I quote, stop discussions of any more settlement units for 4 months and stop authorization of any outposts for 6 months. Within days of the Aqaba agreement, as you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu rushed to disavow it, said that doesn't apply. And then just days after the meeting at Sharm el-Sheikh and after the phone call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Knesset voted to pass a law to lift the ban on re-entering 4 settlements, including Homesh, that Israel had committed to evacuate 20 years ago. State Department spokesperson Patel said the move was, and I quote, inconsistent with Israel's recent commitments to de-escalating Israeli-Palestinian tensions, and said it was a clear contradiction of undertakings the Israeli government made to the United States. I'm assuming that you also support and endorse those comments made by the State Department spokesperson.
Senator, I do, but it's also based on what we hear, and I've heard directly from Israeli leadership as well as the Palestinian Authority about the desire for both sides to see the violence that has reached record levels in recent months de-escalate and to try to get a period of calm. And that's clearly in the interest of both sides, and it's an interest that at least Prime Minister Netanyahu has expressed directly to me. And there are a number of things that go with that. You cited some of them.
Mr. Secretary,
if we see steps inconsistent with that, I think it does contradict what we believe both Israelis and the Palestinian Authority are seeking to do, and what they've said to us is in their own self-interest.
Right. No, I appreciate that. Obviously, we need to see compliance on both sides, the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel. But this was a very official act by the Knesset, just days after the phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. So I'm pleased to see you endorse the statement by the State Department spokesperson. But it seems to me that we look very weak when we continually make statements without any kind of consequence. So I guess my final question to you is, what are we prepared to do? What is the Biden administration prepared to do if you see continuing violations by either side of this agreement?
Look, I don't want to speculate or get into a hypothetical about where this may go and what we would do. I can say that both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority want us to be involved and engaged in helping and supporting and working with them to try to get to this period of calm at some point. If either or both sides are not doing what we believe is necessary to get there, it will be hard or maybe futile for us to do that. So we have to look very carefully at that. But I also think that it's important for everyone to try to double down on the steps necessary to try to get there, because it's profoundly not in the interests of Israel, our close ally and partner, or for that matter, the Palestinian Authority, to see this cycle up.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the efforts, and the United States has been involved in trying to broker these agreements. I guess my question, and I'll just leave it with your last answer, is that, what are we prepared to do when we see violations of those commitments? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, pleased to be with you this morning. Last year in this setting, I asked you about the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. Your response to me touted the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. I would highlight for you that just in the last 6 months, the Australian Foreign Minister, Singapore's Defense Minister, Japan's Foreign Minister have noted, I think with objection, our absence from that agreement. What is it that keeps us from a willingness to engage? You can shift me back to the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, but why is it that this is not a good idea? The TPP is not a good idea for us to engage in. I say this, perhaps from an economic, point of view, but from a relationship. I meant to say this at the very beginning. I'm as concerned about our nation as I've ever been. Those are usually throwaway lines from something we say throughout our careers and lives, but it's genuine with me. The circumstances we now face suggest to me that we need a lot more friends and allies, and our trading relationship, our economic support, those relationships matter. I walked into Senator Rubio and you were conversing, and it seems to me that our foreign policy needs to be different in today's world than it was just even a few years ago. And this would be one that I think would be important from a relationship, from a national security point of view, as much as it is from an economic point of view.
Yeah. So, Senator, a couple of things on that. First, our focus in the immediate is on building up and building out the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, known as IPEF. That does include, among other things, some trade facilitation measures. It has a focus, for example, on digital trade, which is so critical to the 21st century economies. It's something that the partners in that endeavor are very focused on.
Why does that exclude TPP?
It doesn't exclude it. I'm just saying in the first instance, this is where our focus is. Supply chain diversification and resiliency. That is a big part of IPEF. Building out clean economy infrastructures. That's a big focus. And then as well, making sure that we're combating together corruption that so undermines the systems that we're trying to bring together. I was there when TPP was negotiated during the Obama administration. I was engaged in that, and I think that in that moment, it was a very good endeavor and one that I think both economically and strategically had real benefits. I think as it now stands, the world has moved on, and I think we have to focus in the first instance on what we can do and what we can build out and generate support for. Let's see where we get.
Generate support for
here
within the United States.
Within the United States, as well as, of course, among our allies and partners. I would note, of course, that even as we're working on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, we have been building and strengthening new partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, to include the Quad. I just came from a meeting with Japan, with Australia, and with India. That's a very effective vehicle, including on increasingly on economic matters. We, of course, more strategically have AUKUS. President, as you know, just came from a meeting with the UK and Australia on that, and we have deepened and strengthened our engagement with ASEAN, including economically. So all of those pieces fit together.
Mr. Secretary, I just would say from my point of view, when you say we've moved on, we should not have moved on, and we should re-engage. These things are not mutually exclusive, and what you described as occurring are, in my view, good things, but it still leaves out an important component. I join a number of my colleagues here. I'm a co-chair of the Senate Hunger Caucus.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, massive humanitarian crisis, 20 million people facing food insecurity. The Taliban recently eliminated the ability for women to work in NGO organizations and food delivery. What steps are you thinking between you and Samantha Powers and others that can be done in regard to Afghanistan and the world food crisis?
Yeah, Senator, you're right to point to this this huge challenge. We have been, even since the withdrawal from Afghanistan and ending the war, the largest single humanitarian contributor to Afghanistan, particularly when it comes to the fundamentals, the basics like food. We've been working relatively effectively through international partners, implementers, the United Nations, NGOs that were getting food where it was needed and getting other basic humanitarian support. I think there was a real concern in the first year about the possibility of Afghanistan as challenged, deeply challenged as it was, falling even further off the edge. That didn't happen in large part because we were able to sustain the assistance. The problem that we face now is exactly what you pointed to, the edicts promulgated by the Taliban preventing women from participating in the delivery of assistance. That violates a fundamental principle that we do not want to in any way ratify. But what's happening as a practical matter is that in many parts of Afghanistan, that edict is not being implemented, which means that where it's not being implemented, we're able to continue to have these groups support them providing assistance because women are still allowed to participate in its distribution. So that's what's going on right now. But look, I agree with you. The Taliban is taking steps that are digging an even deeper hole for the people of Afghanistan.
This evening, a number of us will say goodbye to Ambassador Beasley, say hello and welcome to Ambassador McCain.
Yeah.
I'd use this opportunity to express my gratitude for the leadership of of Ambassador Beasley. And,
he's been remarkable.
He has been remarkable, and to wish every best wish for Ambassador McCain. 38 seconds, Mr. Secretary. Last month, I sent a letter along with a number of my colleagues to Assistant Secretary Bitter, Consular Affairs. What needs to be done to improve the processing of the visas? That's the nature of our inquiry. It can take over 400 days for a student to get an interview for an appointment. These are certainly strategic in relationship. They're family and humanitarian. Our office, I would guess, like most of my colleagues, has become a passport and visa office. We are a part of apparently the State Department with just hundreds. I see a report every week of what we call casework. Lots of many significant things. Visas and passports occupy a significant portion of our staff's time. We're willing and happy to do it, but there needs to be change at the State Department and Consular Affairs.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. And this is something that, Senator, we are, and I am absolutely seized with. As you know, we've had to build back from COVID. The system for doing the visas as well, by the way, here doing passports is very labor intensive. A lot of that labor, both in terms of contractors and State Department personnel, went away during COVID. We've had to build back, and that has not been without challenge. And we're very focused on dealing with the wait times that people are experiencing in countries around the world. It affects primarily right now first-time visitor applicants. Processing times for categories that have a particular impact on the U.S. economy, students, temporary workers, maritime crew renewals, they are actually where they were before the pandemic, or actually better. For visitor visas, the median global interview appointment wait time is now under 2 months. That's the median. I don't want to say that there are not places of importance where it's longer, but the median time is under 2 months. That's half of what it was in a year ago in 2022. Most places, the wait times are actually much lower than that as a practical matter. We have 58 million foreign nationals who actually hold a valid multi-entry visitor visa, so they don't, of course, need to keep reapplying, and they can visit whenever. And in fact, most international visitors to the United States come to the United States without a visa because they're either Canadian or they're part of the visa waiver program. Again, that doesn't answer the problem for those who require visas. What we're seeing, I think, first 5 months of this fiscal year FY23, we've had a huge surge again in non-immigrant visas. We increased those by 18% over the same period in 19, before the pandemic. Many countries, like Mexico, like Brazil, we actually issued more tourist visas in FY22 than we did in FY19. India, which I know has been a particular concern to a lot of people, the wait time for first-time visitor visa interviews dropped 60% since January of this year, just in the last few months. And we've issued 60% more non-immigrant visas this fiscal year to date than the same period, again, going back to 19. It's a long way of saying, if you look at it comprehensively, there is significant progress and improvement. But there are clearly places where we need to do more to surge some of our assets. And I think also what happens is, anecdotally, these are really human problems. We all hear about them. We get seized with them. We want to work with you to continue to strengthen this and improve our
In that regard, would you think that your personnel at Consular Affairs, they have been helpful and appreciative of the circumstances that we and the people we care about are in? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. We agree on an awful lot of trade policy issues. Senator Schatz. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thrilled to be on this committee. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service and thank you for being here today. First question is, what's your level of confidence that Israel is in compliance with the Leahy Law?
To the best of my knowledge, they are, and certainly it's something that we take very, very seriously everywhere around the world. And when we do the necessary vetting for foreign military sales or others, one of the key things we look at is Leahy Law compliance. So to the best of my knowledge, they are.
Thank you. I see that you have a new program, Strengthening Forest Conservation and Land Management Initiative, which is great. You know, I care very deeply
Yes.
about international deforestation, especially commodity-driven deforestation. A kind of technical question. It's not obvious to me why you're dividing implementation between state and aid. So can you describe the theory of the case here?
I'm actually happy to come back to you on that and make sure that I give you a fully informed answer. I can say generally two things. One, we're deeply committed to this and appreciate the leadership that you've shown on it. Just as by way of example, President Lula, as you know, was in Washington just recently to meet with President Biden. One of the things we focused on, of course, was dealing with the deforestation of the Amazon and indeed hopefully dealing with the reforestation as necessary. We're committed to that. We'd like to actually contribute to the Amazon Fund, something we'll probably need to work with Congress on. But as for the allocation of resources between state and AID, you know, generally speaking, we are focused on, by we I mean the State Department, are focused on the policy and diplomatic aspects of working things. AID tends to implement, and it may be that the budget division reflects that, but I need to give you an informed answer, so let me come back to you.
Sure. Just on Lula, I think obviously there are incredible opportunities here, but it seems to me that we're not going to save the world's forests just sort of hoping for a bunch of Lulas to get elected across the planet. And so I think we do need to come up with an economic model. Lula's a willing, enthusiastic participant, but we have to make it worth it to their country so that other countries that are trying to figure out where to move economically, that they can see a pathway that works for them. So I agree with you about the deforestation fund, and whatever we can do to be supportive there, I'll try to help.
Thank you.
I welcome the budget's focus on democracy and human rights, and particularly robust funding for promoting press freedom. There's no dedicated envoy or office for press freedom, so how do you ensure that press freedom stays high on that list of priorities as your offices across the planet have so many things to contend with, and yet this seems to me to be part of the slide towards authoritarianism across the planet?
It really is front and center on the agenda for a number of offices at the department, and by the way, for me. So this is something I've spent some time on, including making sure that I was speaking up and speaking out on World Press Freedom Day, but also making sure that programmatically we are putting in place the resources, the tools to defend press freedom, and that's exactly what we've done over the last couple of years. It was a key feature, and will, by the way, next week will again be a key feature of the Summit for Democracy. It's one of the critical pillars in that. We put in place, for example, funds to help the press that is being assaulted with lawfare in various places be able to have the funds to defend themselves. We put in place resources to help protect journalists who are actually under physical threat. Senior officials in my department, particularly in the Bureau of Democracy and Labor, are this is right front and center on their agendas. So I can tell you that it's something that I'm personally focused on, and the critical bureaus in our department are focused on.
Thank you. Let's move to the Pacific. I'm glad to see a larger request from the administration for foreign assistance for Pacific Island countries for fiscal year 23, but it's still short of the enacted level. And so could you speak to that, the dollar amount, but also I want to give you a chance to talk about what we're doing in the Pacific Island region, and I want to coach you a little bit, not that you need coaching, but I want to remind us that it is difficult to compete with graft, right?
Yep.
And so what we have to offer are, as you say, values, right, and relationships. And as I've talked to Pacific Island leaders, sure, they need resources, and especially in a climate change context, lots of these countries are really in need of our direct material assistance, but they also want to be respected as sovereigns. And so I'd like you to talk through how attitudinally we're shifting, and not just throwing another, say, $80 million at the problem and then trying to park all of our military hardware wherever it's convenient on a map. These have to be a sovereign-to-sovereign relationship. I'd like you to talk to that.
So we fundamentally elevated the Pacific Island countries in our foreign policy and in our diplomacy, and that really culminated with what was really, I think, a historic summit meeting between President Biden and the leaders of the Pacific Island nations, something that I took part in, and it really was an extraordinary moment because I think it said to them and it said to their people that the United States is engaged in a different way. And now that needs to manifest itself in concrete, practical ways. Our diplomatic presence, as you know, we opened in the Solomon Islands. We're looking at establishing 2 to 3 other embassies or outposts in the Pacific Islands where we've been absent for the last years. That is moving forward. It's also reflected in our budget. Our economic engagement, particularly in finding and catalyzing resources to deal with challenges that are affecting the lives of Pacific Islanders, that is front and center. As you know, it's an interesting challenge because in many cases, each individual island nation is small, and so making a market can be complicated, but particularly as they're pooled together and we're able to pool some resources, we're doing that. I think on climate, we have an absolute responsibility, and we're acting on it to try to provide the technical assistance, the technology, and, yes, the resources to deal with this, particularly for countries that literally risk not existing because of climate change. And, of course, programs that we have that are reflected in the budget for education, for governance, for building institutions, all of those are there. I'm happy to work with you and work with your team to make sure that we are properly resourced to do that, but this really is front and center in our thinking.
Thank you. Just one final thought on what's happening with climate. I think there are some cases, Kiribati is a good example, where they really might vanish.
Yeah.
But I think the less precipitous but just as bad scenario is saltwater inundation of the freshwater systems, of the irrigation systems. And so you can't drink water, you can't use water to farm, and then there's no economy at all.
Yeah.
And none of these people have any place to go. So although I love what DFC is doing, and I love the opportunities to kind of envision economic growth, but the truth is some of these people need immediate assistance because they can't drink the salt water, and their runways are flooding. And so I think we need to race to their aid without precondition.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Chairman.
if you have 10 more minutes, rather than submitting a whole bunch of questions for the record, I'm going to quickly run through 5 topics.
Of course.
We have a noon vote. To the best of my knowledge, no other member of the committee is coming back. None of these will surprise you, but I thought it was worth the time since we have each other here. Let me pick up from the point that Senator Schatz was just making. The Development and Finance Corporation, I think, is a big step forward. You're the chairman of the board. I'd love to hear, so I briefly want to talk about DFC, GFA, Conservation Foundation, PEPFAR Mexico. And I can start with the first 2 and get them disposed of quickly. The 20th anniversary of PEPFAR is indeed worth celebrating. I'm glad that you've prioritized it in your opening statement. We have some real work to do here to make sure that it remains authorized and robustly funded, and I look forward to working closely with you on that. I just spent the weekend in Mexico with a broad bipartisan group of senators and House members. We have an outstanding ambassador. We got 4 hours of the president's time, President Lopez Obrador, and his entire cabinet. And for the first 2 hours, he simply listened as members of his cabinet made presentations and members of our delegation engaged. I believe there is much more good news about our partnership and its potential in terms of border crossings and security, fentanyl interdiction, economic development, and some of the ways that our economies and our values and priorities align than one could easily discern from the cable coverage of this. But there are some real irritants in the relationship.
Senator, can I just say very quickly, I very much agree with that. And we really have seen in many places our Mexican partners step up to including dealing with drug trafficking, dealing with the transnational criminal enterprises. But the problem is huge. They are resource deficient. And so I think we have to continue to work with them. We have restored the security dialogue that would have been held in abeyance. We're working very actively under that. We have a bicentennial framework, as we've called it, to really move out on concrete cooperation. And again, we have seen seizures go up. We have seen the very active work to disband criminal enterprises. We've seen a very significant increase in Mexican law enforcement that has arrest authority by the creation of a National Guard. That's been important. And of course on migration, they have been a critical partner. It doesn't answer the full problem, but absent that partnership, the challenge would be even greater. So sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important, you're right, to underscore the fact that they are a vital partner. Never mind the fact that, one of our two largest trading partners in the world.
A presentation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs made it very clear that the recent initiative taken by the Biden administration to require an application, a legal process, crossing at a border point, brought down dramatically entrants from 4 different countries.
That's right.
I'm eager to work with you if I possibly can to support finding a path forward as we anticipate the end of Title 42 in the middle of May. So, DFC, you are the chairman of the board.
Yes.
How successful do you think we've been using this newly expanded tool? It's built on the base of OPIC, but it's got new equity authorities. It can do a whole range of things that we couldn't do before. I think this is a critical opportunity to crowd in private sector capital investment and de-risk it. Where are we making a difference? Where are we not? And what do you think we need to fix to make it really reach its potential?
Yeah, so I fully share your view that the DFC is a critical tool, one that I think we're using increasingly effectively, and it goes to exactly the points that you're making. For the United States, the comparative advantage we have, if we do it right, is mobilizing, catalyzing the private sector. We obviously are not going to match China, for example, dollar for dollar coming from our taxpayers. And the DFC is a vital tool in doing that. I do think that there are a couple of critical additions that we could make to the DFC that would make it even more effective. And one, maybe the most important one from my perspective and our perspective, is lifting the constraints that require counting equity like a grant. Basically, what is most in demand, which are equity investments from the DFC, end up being what costs the most. And I believe if we do that, we will see its effectiveness in leveraging more private sector investment go up significantly.
Well, I look forward to working closely with you on that. Your budget proposes a $2 billion mandatory to the DFC.
That's right.
While welcome, while engaging, that does not address the most important issue, which you're absolutely right, is a legal fix.
That's right.
To a scoring issue that is restraining this from being, if you come to the party and everybody else has got equity investments and you've only got debt, you're the last person. And in a game of musical chairs, that often means we don't get to pick our partners, we don't get to drive and scope the project, we don't get to deliver on the values that are at the core of transparency and labor and environment that we would like to see. So I hope that in this year, in this authorizing process, in the Foreign Relations Committee, where you may well be this afternoon, this issue might also be discussed. Global Fragility Act, something Senator Graham and I crafted based on positive experiences with Colombia. It's an important tool, but the whole goal here was to, with state at the lead, have state AID and DOD jointly plan. Having recently visited Niger, as I know you did as well, likely heading back to coastal West Africa, there are places where we need to show this kind of prioritization. I think it's off to a slow start, and I'm concerned about the lack of active senior engagement from DOD. I want to make sure this isn't just viewed as another foreign assistance program, but instead as a framework that prioritizes states' leadership. What are you doing to get this off the ground right? How can I help?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a critical framework for us, and I think it has the very strong merit in making sure that we have a holistic, comprehensive, whole-of-government approach to dealing with fragility, because we know that just focusing on any one piece of this, security, foreign assistance, you take it, is not enough, doesn't answer the mail, and that's why I think this is was a very welcome thing. Yes, we have been working intensely on this. What I can tell you today is that I think very, very imminently forthcoming are the actual approved country plans by the president. So I think that will be an important step forward, and as I said, I think that is imminent.
Perhaps we'll have another conversation as soon as those are out about how to better engage DOD at a senior enough level that it moves the needle. Thank you. Last thing, I'm sorry, I got one more.
Please.
We have worked hard together to provide robust assistance to Ukraine. In fact, I think this has been President Biden's best chapter in a very long career of public service, really marshaling the resources of the world to deliver from sanctions to humanitarian to economic to military assistance as Ukraine continues to fight bravely. Are we doing enough to ensure proper oversight of our assistance and to avoid an unforced error, a challenge to sustaining our assistance through a lack of accountability and transparency?
So, again, I couldn't agree with you more. This is something we're intensely focused on precisely because we have an obligation to make sure that the taxpayers' money is being used the way it was intended to be used. And also, we certainly don't want to give those who may not want to sustain the support reason to move us in that direction. So, we've been intensely focused on this. I've got on the ground right now in our embassy in Kyiv 45 people whose responsibility is to oversee the funds that we're providing to the government of Ukraine. That's just on the State Department side. DOD has its own people on the ground, including at our embassy, to make sure that the military equipment that we're providing is being used in the right way. The system that's in place is actually a very, very good one. And basically, when it comes to direct budget support, most of it goes through the World Bank. The World Bank has a system where the money is dispersed to reimburse based on receipts and approved expenditures, the money. The Office of the Inspector General did its first report on this that just came out a few weeks ago, and it found, and I don't want to quote it directly, but the bottom line finding was that we got very good marks on the oversight and making sure that the money was being spent well and that the processes are in place to ensure that. At the same time, there's also third-party validation. Deloitte is working within the Ministry of Finance in Ukraine to make sure that it has the systems in place to make sure that the money is being well used. And the final thing I'll say is this. We've seen President Zelensky go at challenges of corruption or misuse of funds in the government with a sledgehammer, removing very senior officials across multiple ministries who allegedly were involved in either corruption or improper oversight of funds. So I take that as a very good sign that not only are we seized with it, but the government of Ukraine is too.
You talked with two different members about reforestation in Brazil and the Amazon and the importance of addressing climate in a meaningful way. One of the areas I think we could come together is around reforestation and conservation, improving the management of wild and open spaces that are not yet overrun by people and poachers, particularly in South America and in Africa. A group of us led by Senator Graham and me, but 4 others, introduced the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation Act. It would principally draw in philanthropic and private individual donations, set up a board that would have U.S. government, experts in the field, and donors prioritizing these funds for the long-term preservation of spaces that are genuinely at risk. Are you aware of it? Is it something you might support? Is it something we could work on together?
I need to look at this very carefully. As you've described it, it certainly sounds like something that we'd want to support. Let me look at the details and come back to you. But please. I think there's a lot of merit to that, particularly when it comes to making sure we're engaged now in places that are still open to being secured and preserved. So I'd welcome working on that.
You just released the department's annual country reports on human rights practices. Yes. Closing question, where have we made the most progress? What have we left undone? Yeah. What should we do in the next 2 years to advance human rights?
So, if you look at the report, I think it's, let me say diplomatically, a mixed picture. We continue to see democratic backsliding and backsliding on human rights in a number of countries. Something that we call out very clearly in the report. And, one of the things that's so important about the report is we apply the same lens, the same prism to friends, to competitors, to adversaries across the board. And, of course, we acknowledge our own challenges in that. At the same time, I think the report points out that in a number of places we've seen genuine progress, important progress. I think there are a number of countries, for example, where looking at some marginalized groups that have been particularly victimized, like the LGBTQI+ community. There's some countries where we've actually seen real progress in upholding are protecting their rights, just as there are other places where that continues to backslide in a significant way. So it's a mixed, I think it's a very mixed report, but what's important about it is it continues to put a spotlight on these challenges with the imprimatur of the United States government on it. I think it's a way of strongly encouraging countries to take steps that they need to take to improve the human rights picture. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that every year when we do this, I think it's incumbent upon me to go and present the report. I do that in front of our media in the State Department briefing room, just to make sure that people understand that this really comes from the Secretary of State on behalf of the President of the United States, and it's something that we attach tremendous importance to.
Well, thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for 2 hours of high energy and engaging testimony. I know you have another session in front of our authorizing committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, later today. I think most importantly, you make a compelling case for the urgent national security-based need to invest more robustly in our diplomacy and development. So I look forward to working with you together to see what we can move forward and get past this year. I'll just say to the colleagues who've joined, we had, I think, a dozen senators participate at different points. This was a good and constructive hearing. Senator Haggerty had information related to the Vulcan case, the seizure of a port that he'd like added to the record, so ordered. And the hearing record will remain open for written questions until 5 p.m. Wednesday, March 29th. With that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.